Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. With us for the second half of our show is Michael Mandel, Chief Economic Strategist at the Progressive Policy Institute, where, among other things, he studies the impact of regulations on innovation. Mike, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Mike, you put yourself forward as a pro-growth progressive. What does that mean?
Well, it means that we think that growth is the most important force driving living standards and helping making everybody better off. And by growth means a combination of investment in physical capital, in human capital, in knowledge capital, in a way that we have this innovative economy that actually ends up helping everyone. And I know at this point that it's not usual to think about innovation as being a force for equality, but that's historically what it's been, and a lot of our research shows that that's what it is now.
How does this square with the neo-Malthusian view that seems to have a lot of popularity in certain circles that claim that we're using up the Earth's resources, that growth for growth's sake is bad, that we need to constrain our numbers and go back to some simpler life or simpler times?
Originally, the idea behind the Malthusian view was that population growth was inevitably going to lead to starvation because we would run out of food. And that turned out not to be true because you had technological advances in agriculture and transportation and manufacturing that meant that the food supply not only sort of kept up with the population, but actually grew faster. Mm-hmm. Right now at this point, we're in this funny situation where we've seen these innovative gains in communications and information technology. We haven't seen innovation in other areas such as transportation, energy, and so forth. So right now, there's certain things that look kind of bleak because we're projecting forward into the future. History tells us that as we have energy innovations, transportation innovations, innovations in the way that we live, that a lot of these concerns about the future of the Earth and environment can be dealt with in other ways. They're all real concerns, but the way forward is more innovation rather than less.
If you look at the Western economies now, we've pretty much flatlined when it comes to growth. They're claiming a couple of percent, if you believe the numbers. Most of the growth is happening in what used to be called the third world or developing countries. We're seeing billions being lifted out of poverty through their own efforts. Are they going to catch up with us, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think over time you would like to see the benefits of technology and growth spread around the world. It's hard to know exactly what form it's going to take, but it doesn't mean that we have to stagnate the developed world. What we have to do is understand that we're stuck in a little bit of sort of outside of communications technology. We need to sort of push forward in other areas of innovation as well. For example, one of the things that we've been looking at is the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things has the effect of spreading the benefits of information technology away from the 20% of the economy, which is digital, to the 80% of the economy that's physical. And so at that point, what we would actually see is a lot more growth and probably rising wages and living standards.
It seems to be happening, although they're following a trajectory, I guess, similar to ours, though compressed in history. Last time I was in China, I was in Changsha, and the air reminded me a lot of the air in Pittsburgh back in the 60s. There are complaints that they're dumping a lot of pollution into their environment. And in fact, the disparity between environmental regulations in the developed countries and in China is what's giving them a leg up economically as they get into heavy industry. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think one of the issues in China is the legitimacy of their political structure. Right now, they've got a pretty good economy, and it's good in an interesting way, which is that it's very good at absorbing technology, learning from it, and moving forward. That's a wonderful skill, and to the degree to which other countries can learn from it, that's terrific. But they don't have what we would consider to be a government which is legitimized by democracy. And so they've got a real problem if they actually slow down the economy. And it's hard to know what's going to happen there over the next 10 or 20 years.
When you look at their choices, why are they building solar panels rather than smokestack scrubbers? You would think that there's a more urgent need for smokestack scrubbers there. It's known technology. It's exactly what we use to clean up our air, rather than building solar panels for rich people in California.
Right. They are building things for exports because by building things for export, they can actually put more of their people to work. I'm going to be fascinated to see the way that the Chinese economy unfolds over the next 10 years. Part of the issue is that they pose a challenge to us on a governance level in the sense that they have top-down governance of certain tough issues that we, as a country, and actually the developed world, seems not able to manage right now. So our advantage should be on how you handle innovative technologies, and we're kind of fumbling that a little bit too.
Well, we're certainly subsidizing things in premature stages and making big financial holes in the ground, particularly on the energy side. Reading some of your writings, I'm fascinated that I've never seen someone simultaneously take a pop at Paul Krugman and Milton Friedman. They're usually defined as opposite sides of the spectrum. What issue do you have with those two?
What I look at is whether people fundamentally believe in the importance of innovation for growth. And you look at the writings of Milton Friedman and Paul Krugman, and both of them are far smarter than I'll ever be. But you're struck by how little emphasis they placed on the importance of innovation and technological change, where we know that the big difference between Western civilization and other civilizations that went earlier, Western civilization over the last 200 years has been able to harness and focus innovation and technological change in a way that was not possible before. We talk about economics as a dismal science, and that's really, economics is a dismal science if you don't include in the possibility of innovation. Once you do, things change. And we also know from other research, from Bob Solow and others, of the importance of innovation in terms of driving growth. So the reason why I put Paul Krugman and Milton Friedman in the same category is they don't really treat innovation as being all that important and all that interesting, and are basically kind of skeptical. I sort of categorize economists into two buckets: the ones that care about innovation and growth and the ones that don't. And the ones that don't are actually a much larger bucket on both the left and the right side.
Well, perhaps it's because in college they teach them that there's such a thing as equilibrium in markets, and I've certainly never seen that in the real world.
I think it goes beyond whether or not you think about equilibrium or not. You can have disequilibrium, you can have free markets with innovation, you can have free markets without innovation. Now, free markets with innovation are a much, much different beast, because what happens there is it opens up the possibility for all sorts of upward mobility, all sorts of improvement in living standards of the people at the bottom. They're really transformative. If you have free markets without innovation, it looks like what you're doing is you're redividing up the same pie in different ways, and it becomes a zero-sum game. And so if economists sort of focus too much on the market side without caring enough about the innovation and the change side, it ends up sounding like a counsel of despair.
But the challenge with innovative economies is that the creative destruction that comes with it creates losers. In a democracy, those losers go and rent or buy politicians, and those politicians then put regulations in place to try to stifle innovation.
Bill, let me actually just put it a different way.
Okay.
If you have an economy with very narrow innovation, then you'll have a very narrow set of winners. If you have an economy with broad innovation across a bunch of different areas, then there'll be a lot more winners, and you have a much more of the ability to form political coalitions to move things forward. Part of the problem with our current economy is not that we have too much innovation, but we don't have enough.
How do regulations play a role in that? I know you've been very involved in trying to put together a regulatory improvement commission, politically viable approach to regulatory reform. What's the problem you're addressing there?
Well, the problem here is that in the U.S. and actually in other countries as well, regulations accumulate over time. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that when you put in a regulation, it's done with the best will in the world to address a real problem. That problem may change. The economy may change. Regulations become obsolete. They become overlapping. They maybe didn't work the way that you expected. Right now, we don't have a mechanism for undoing regulatory accumulation.
Barnacle cleaning.
Barnacle cleaning. Every president has tried the idea of retrospective review, which is they tell the agencies, go and clean up your regs, and nobody ever does. It never works. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Part of it just has to do with agencies don't want to do it, but the more to the point, it's just a very expensive and time-consuming process.
Doesn't every ancient regulation have some rent-seeking crony capitalist attached to it who's going to fight tooth and nail if you try to remove it?
Well, let's just take out all those adjectives for a second. What I would say more precisely is that every regulation has both a political and technical component to it. And when it comes down to it, undoing a regulation has winners and losers as well. So part of what we were doing was trying to construct a process that would not only make technical sense, but would be politically viable. We decided that the technocratic approach, the cost-benefit approach to sort of fixing the regulatory process wasn't going to work. We were really concerned about regulatory accumulation impeding innovation. And we said to ourselves, can we come up with a way, even in the nasty, hostile, politically divided climate of Washington, to undo regs that everybody can agree are problems? How do we get past the stuck process? And we came up with this idea of a regulatory improvement commission. The Congress, sort of like the old base closing commissions. You have a commission, Congress approves it, it goes off with a bunch of experts, it sort of takes suggestions about regulations to eliminate or improve, comes back with a list of 15 or 20 as a package, sends them through as a package to Congress for an up or down vote, then to the president to be signed. And basically, from a technical point of view, because you're doing this through Congress and then through the president, it runs into no constitutional problems. And because Congress gets 2 bites of the apple on this, it actually has the chance of being approved even in this kind of divided climate.
And your up or down vote as a package solves the log rolling problem.
Solves the log rolling problem. Because if the commission has crafted a package appropriately, where it has some eliminations, some improvements, some fixing of technical problems, and at least the first go around, you ruled off the table some of the most contentious regulations. I would sort of say that the first time you do this, you don't do environmental regulation.
Start with the low-hanging fruit.
Well, you start with the low-hanging fruit, or you just stay away from the stuff that's really tough. And then after people have seen that this process works once, maybe the next time you sort of tackle the stuff that's a little bit tougher. But the idea here is that I think that there's a lot more consensus than people think about what really needs to be done. All we have to do is construct a process that Republicans and Democrats won't feel is going to get out of control.
Are you getting any bipartisan traction with this regulatory improvement?
We are. It's been introduced in the Senate as a bill by Senators Angus King and Roy Blunt. And there appears to be movement in the House as well. But, we're about to go into the 2014 election season. So probably we've seen as much movement now as we're going to see until after the election. In 2015, we'll see what happens. If you sort of look at the proposals that are out there, some of them are these big cosmic proposals about redoing the whole regulatory system that are never going to pass in today's climate. So we said, okay, let's start small, something that engages in trust building, and let's assume with a different set of institutions that we really can get better results. And maybe this shows our naivete, or maybe not. I guess I view the question about whether a regulation is good or not is partly a cost-benefit question, but it's partly about politics as well.
I suppose what you're doing is illustrating the old saying that politics is the art of the possible.
Exactly. And also, you can't have technical by itself. Well, I think part of the problem that we've experienced on the regulatory front is we've viewed cost-benefit analysis. That is, if we just did it right, we could sort of figure out which regulations were good and which ones were bad. No. At this point now, it's partly about what we as a society care about. And it really is about politics as well. And so retrospective review just had it being done within the executive branch. You can't do that. Have Congress vote on it too. Have it go back to the president too. If we really do as a society want to move forward, we'll find a way to do it. And let's not get involved in sort of shooting at each other or trying to do these big cosmic things that are not going to make sense.
Well, your cost-benefit analysis has clearly failed as a process inside the government. Every regulation is supposed to be subject to that, and I think only a minuscule fraction are. But what about third parties that do a cost-benefit analysis and at least publicize the hidden and actual costs to the American public so the voters can make more informed decisions?
I don't find this a very good way to go, and let me explain to you why. I'm an economist by training. I spent many years as a journalist. Now I'm doing public policy in D.C. And my experience is that data analysis in general always requires a set of assumptions. And so I can take the economic data and with the smallest of changes come up with very different conclusions.
Sounds like climate modeling.
I'm going to pass on that one for now. Remember, we said we were going to take environmental off the table?
Okay.
My view on a lot of the cost benefit is that if I actually wanted to do a true cost benefit analysis on an environmental regulation, I would need to do an intrusive data collection from companies. Okay? That is to say, if I really wanted to know what was going on, I would have to actually collect the data from companies on a level that they would not want to give it. And so I find cost-benefit analysis, while in theory it makes sense, in practice it's self-contradictory. And the other issue with cost-benefit analysis is that part of what cost-benefit analysis is not simply the cost of the option that you took, it's the cost of the options that you didn't take. What sort of innovative alternatives were available to you? And my personal view is that if I want to put a single regulation on a business, basically speaking, they have enough degrees of freedom in order to deal with it without causing them much trouble. The more regs that you put on them in the same area, the more that they're hemmed in, and the more they shift to a compliance mentality. So I'm about scraping barnacles off the bottom of the ship, taking pebbles out of a dam built in a stream. I don't really want to run a cost-benefit analysis on each pebble or each barnacle. I just want to scrape them off.
Well, plus what you miss, I know as a venture capitalist, we have abandoned entire fields because the regulatory risk or regulatory uncertainty is so high that we can't do economic calculations or decide to take the plunge. And you will never measure the cost of the products that didn't exist or the cost reductions that never took place because the incumbents who took a regulatory mentality and a compliance mentality continue to dominate the field, and the startups just never go there.
That's exactly right. So from my point of view, I don't want to spend the money to do the extensive cost-benefit analysis that nobody's going to believe anyhow. I just want to get started with scraping the barnacles off the bottom of the boat.
Let's dive into an area, and I don't know how much time you've spent on the financial regulatory front in the wake of Dodd-Frank, but
right.
we now seem to see a new phenomenon, and that is regulatory agencies like the SEC who, in a sense, set themselves up as legislator, prosecutor, judge, and jury, who will take very, very vague mandates coming out of the law, expand that into regulations, some of which are written and some of which are not written, find vulnerable corporations that they believe have infringed, investigate, sue, demand billion-dollar settlements, which are generally given in because the company can't afford to fight it in court. How did that happen, and what does that have to do with the separation of powers and rule of law we're supposed to be operating under?
That's a remarkably long question. I'm going to turn it into two shorter questions.
Okay.
One question is, in the wake of the financial crisis, where clearly something went wrong with the financial markets, something had to be done. Something had to be done regulatory-wise. And leaving aside what it was, something had to be done. So what was passed in Dodd-Frank was something that actually required the SEC and the other regulatory agencies to write rules. Part of the reason why we're interested in the Regulatory Improvement Commission is to deal exactly with this sort of question. Nobody wants to reopen Dodd-Frank again. Okay? It would be nice, though, to have a venue to, in a selected and targeted way, go back and undo or redo or improve some of the things that are being done on the regulatory front. And what we need to be able to do is be clever enough to sort of construct that type of institutional back channel, as it were, that enable you to do that. And so you can think of a regulatory improvement commission being convened just on financial regulation, where the goal is to sort of have 10, 15 improvements, rewrites of pieces of regs that probably balance out places where it can be made tougher, where places that you can get rid of things that are just too tough or just went too much in the wrong direction.
How can this be done out of sight of the howling mob?
We live in a world of politics. And the fact is, we have to be willing to live in that world when it comes to regulation. And our picture of how the Regulatory Improvement Commission would work is in plain sight. Open sourcing suggestions, open testimony, and getting to the point where you can sort of package together a combination of fixes, changes, improvements that can garner support in Congress and then in the White House.
How do you prevent it from becoming a media circus?
Oh, remember, I'm an ex-journalist. I love media circuses. There's good media circuses and there's bad media circuses. Remember, I'm an economist. I've got a PhD in economics. I'm a journalist. I spent 20 years as Business Week as the chief economics writer there. The fact of the matter is we've got a lot of fantastic journalism out there. We've got a lot of crappy journalism. And the fantastic journalism illuminates the things that we need to illuminate. The crappy makes the stuff less clear. And when you get down to it, it's not the fault of the journalists. It's really the fault of the experts that are feeding them faulty information. So right at this point, I have no fear of media circuses. I have no fear of politics. What I want is the institution in place that would enable you to do this, regulatory back channel, and I want to see it work. I don't see any reason why transparency is an enemy of good process.
If there's a Republican sweep in the 2004 midterm elections, does this make your job easier or harder to get a Regulatory Improvement Commission up and running?
Bill, to be completely honest with you, I haven't a clue. My ability to sort of read which way the political winds are blowing at any particular point, I can't see it. All I know is that this regulation problem has persisted under both Republican and Democratic administrations, under both Republican and Democratic and split Congresses. I think it's a function of the way the system is set up as opposed to sort of whose hands are on the lever. Yeah. And right. Frankly, I actually think that on most issues at this point, surprisingly, that there's far more agreement than it looks like.
So, Mike, as we wrap up and we swing back around to thoughts of how growth and innovation could solve some more economic problems, what do you have to say to people who fear that innovation might take their jobs?
What we're seeing, Bill, is that in actually the tech field, that innovation is creating jobs. And more generally, innovation historically has always tended to create jobs in areas where the innovation was moving forward. So right now, the U.S. and developed countries are not suffering from too much innovation. We're suffering from not enough.
Mike, I really appreciate you being on the program. Let's keep in touch and keep track of your RIC and see how it goes.
Very, very glad to be here, Bill.
That wraps up our show for this week. We've been speaking with Michael Mandel, Chief Economic Strategist at the Progressive Policy Institute, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. If you have any comments or questions or would like to suggest guests or topics for our show, drop me an email at bill@realclearradio.org. See you next week.